I got off work early that Friday, feeling unstoppable. Thought I'd pull off the ultimate surprise for my wife. Thought I'd sweep her off her feet with a sudden getaway. Something romantic and unexpected. But what I walked into, it wasn't just a surprise. It was a detonation. The first thing I saw when I stepped into the house were clothes. Not just tossed around laid out, like breadcrumbs leading to something unspeakable. At first, I just froze there in the entryway, my breath stuck somewhere between my lungs and my throat. It was like time slowed down just enough for every single detail to stab me one by one. They say your whole world can change in a moment. That's not true. It doesn't change. It fractures. It breaks with a creak of a floorboard or the click of a door handle. And when it does, you're not ready. No one ever is. I should have known. Maybe I did know. Maybe every gut feeling, every odd late-night phone call, every excuse that didn't quite add up, maybe I buried them under hope and trust because I loved her too damn much. But love doesn't make you blind. It just makes you ignore the warning signs until they drown you. The day had started out like something out of a perfect life. I'd wrapped up a tough case earlier than expected. Got my client off with a loophole that would have made any courtroom drama proud. The office was flooded with golden sunlight. I remember grinning like an idiot as I shut off my computer. My heart was light, my mind full of her smile. The weekend was meant to be unforgettable. Plane tickets, first class, booked and tucked away. In my briefcase, hotel suite. She'd ogled online for weeks. A necklace tucked inside my pocket, 3 months' salary. Delicate and brilliant. She'd lingered outside that jewelry shop like a child pressing her nose to a toy store window. I remembered her voice. It's so stunning. And I knew then I had to get it. Even my assistant was surprised when I left early. She raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay, sir?" she asked gently. I laughed. Just going to surprise my wife. The drive home felt unreal now, like some kind of false memory planted in my brain to torture me. The radio was blasting. I was singing. Picked up that overpriced champagne she loved. I didn't care about the cost, never had. Not when it came to her. Our home, a charming old brownstone, looked like something out of a home magazine when I pulled in. Fresh flowers in the window boxes. Perfect lawn. All a lie. I unlocked the front door, or rather, didn't have to. It was wide open, and that should have been the first red flag, but I was too wrapped up in my fantasy. She always locked the door. Always. Paranoid since that break in a few years back. But I walked in without a second thought. Then I saw them. Shoes. Men's shoes. Expensive, polished. Not mine. Just sitting there near the entrance. Like they belonged. Like he belonged. My stomach clenched. But I still tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe someone dropped by. But none of my friends dressed like that. And certainly none had any reason to be here at this hour. Then came the shirt. Navy blue. Tossed over the railing like a signal. A bra followed black. Lace. I recognized it. I bought it. Valentine's Day. Then jeans. Hers. The pair I loved. The ones I always thought made her look unstoppable. They were bunched on the stairs, careless and damning. By the time I stood at the bottom of the staircase, my mind had caught up with reality. It was happening. I didn't need to go upstairs. The truth was already in front of me. Plain, loud, cruel. I couldn't move, couldn't yell, couldn't even cry. I just stood there, numb, until something in me clicked. A calmness washed over me, cold, unnatural. My heart stopped racing. My breathing slowed. Not because I was okay, but because I'd gone beyond feeling. I went to the den, dragged the old recliner, my grandfather's, passed down from father to son, leather worn smooth by generations of hands. I positioned it at the base of the staircase. My boots echoed on the hardwood as I walked to the safe, dialed in the numbers. Her birthday. I had always been that kind of man. Pulled out my 45, heavy, familiar. It wasn't new to me. I'd had it for years, kept it clean, ready, just in case. And now, here I was, living that exact case. I sat down in the chair, the old leather groaning beneath me. The weight of the gun rested on my lap like it knew it belonged there. Upstairs, the sounds started soft at first. Voices, laughter, her laugh. It twisted something deep in me. That laugh used to be my favorite sound. Now, it was the sound of everything I thought was real slipping through my fingers. I didn't know what I was going to do. I wasn't a killer. I was a man who used words to fight. But in that moment, I didn't feel like myself. I felt like something hollow, watching the shell of a life crumble. That's the truth about betrayal. It doesn't make you furious. It makes you frozen. Everything goes quiet. No yelling. No panic. Just silence that suffocates. That's when I saw his things on the table. A wallet, leather, pricey. Next to it, a phone, sleek and flashy. They weren't hidden. They weren't tucked away. He'd left them out like he owned the damn place. Like this wasn't his first visit. Like my house, my marriage, my life were his playground. That was the moment the illusion didn't just crack, it collapsed. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't some heat of the moment affair. This man felt safe here, like he belonged. And that realization hit me harder than any bullet ever could. So I sat, and I waited, and I listened to my life falling apart, one laugh at a time. I walked into my house earlier than usual, hoping to catch my wife off guard with a surprise visit. Instead, what greeted me were clothes, a trail of them leading up the stairs toward our bedroom. I didn't rush. I just sat down in my favorite chair, resting my hand on the cold weight sitting across my lap. The phone on the coffee table buzzed constantly, its screen lighting up every few moments like it was trying to speak for someone who wasn't in the room. Missed calls, message previews, names. One name appeared repeatedly, flashing across the screen like a siren. Home. Whoever this man was, someone on the other end of that contact was desperate to get hold of him. The more I watched it buzz, the more a strange calm settled over me. My pulse didn't jump. My hands didn't shake. They stayed still, steady, like I was holding a scalpel, not a gun. Though the device was locked, the screen revealed just enough. Partial messages, call alerts, timestamps, and that name again. Home. Whoever this woman was, she was listed as the emergency contact. His wife. The realization hit hard. The man upstairs screwing my wife was married too. There was another woman out there, likely preparing dinner, maybe helping her kids with homework, completely unaware that her life was on the verge of imploding just like mine had. I stared at the phone, letting the implications settle in. One message preview read, "Where are you? Kids are asking." That was all I could see, but it was enough to understand what kind of man Reed really was. When the next call came in, I didn't hesitate. I swiped to answer. The voice that greeted me was sharp, irritated. "Reed. What the hell? I've been calling for hours." So now I had a name. Reed. The kind of name that fits someone with a smug grin and a closet full of overpriced suits. The kind who thinks being charming excuses everything. "This isn't Reed," I replied, my voice low, calm, precise. Years in the courtroom had trained me to speak like this under pressure. The other end of the line went quiet. Then, "Who is this?" Her tone had shifted. No more frustration now, there was unease, laced with dread. "My name is Malcolm Briggs," I said, each syllable sharp. "I'm in my living room, holding your husband's phone." Silence stretched. I could hear her breathing, feel her mind trying to piece it all together. "Where's Reed?" she asked, quieter now, like she already knew what the answer would be. "Upstairs," I said, "with my wife." Still, she didn't scream. She didn't cry or beg for details. She laughed. A dry, broken laugh, the kind that comes from years of ignoring your gut, years of gaslighting and lies finally catching up with reality. "That bastard," she whispered, and in those 3 words I could hear a story. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," I told her, and I meant it. However terrible Reed was, this woman didn't deserve to be blindsided by a complete stranger. "My name is Dana," she said, "and don't be sorry. I've been waiting for a call like this for 3 damn years. 3 years. God, how long had Reed been playing this game? How many homes had he stepped into and left wrecked behind him? What are you planning to do?" Dana asked, her voice now sharp, almost daring. "I don't know yet," I replied. Honestly, the gun still lay heavy across my lap, its presence full of silent potential. "When you do figure it out," she said, her words like a hammer on glass, "tell that lying sack of garbage not to come crawling back to my doorstep. I'll be waiting with divorce papers and a restraining order." The line went dead. I placed the phone back exactly where I'd found it and leaned back, breathing slow. Dana had just handed me something I didn't even realize I'd wanted. Confirmation. I didn't need permission to act, but knowing there was someone else, ready to reduce Reed's world to ashes, it made things feel clearer, simpler. There's a strange theater to moments like this when everything in your life splits apart. You almost feel detached, like you're watching a play you forgot you auditioned for. That's how I felt sitting, with cold steel in my lap, waiting for the closing scene of this twisted drama. The sounds from upstairs grew louder, footsteps, furniture shifting, floorboards creaking in patterns I'd memorized over years, little things, like the pop near the window or the subtle groan near the closet. It was the soundtrack of my own home being desecrated. Then came the sound that hit me hardest. Laughter. Soft, breathless laughter, the exact kind of laugh she used to make when I did something corny but sweet. That laugh I used to live for now made my jaw clench. My thumb rested against the safety. I didn't move hastily. I wasn't a man who snapped. I was Malcolm Briggs, a man trained to measure every move, weigh every outcome. I didn't let rage take over. I just reached down and clicked the safety off. That little sound, metal on metal, was louder than thunder. A crisp note that rang through the quiet house like a warning bell. Strange how something so small can carry so much weight. It was a sound I'd heard countless times on the range, but tonight, in my own house, it meant something else entirely. It meant the waiting was over. With my marriage unraveling right before my eyes, even the air felt different, denser, heavier, like the whole world had shifted on its axis. The footsteps above me stopped, and for a moment, the entire house seemed paralyzed. No creaking floorboards, no distant hums, just utter stillness. The kind of silence that hangs before a storm, when the birds vanish and the air feels too quiet to loaded. I could feel it push into my ears like I'd been dropped underwater, suspended in tension. Then the stairs groaned under a new weight. They were coming down. Talia appeared first. And God, she looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd just been thoroughly taken by a man who wasn't her husband. Her dark hair was wild, not in the way it gets after a nap, but in that unmistakable way that follows lust. She wore the emerald silk robe I gave her last Christmas, the one that always brought out her eyes, but now it clung to her like an afterthought, loosely tied, revealing far too much. Her skin was flushed, glowing with that heat I used to think was for me. But this time, it wasn't mine. When our eyes locked, something inside her broke. The soft smile she'd been wearing faded instantly. All that smug, post-pleasure ease vanished in a heartbeat. Her green eyes went wide, shock, dread, and shame all crashing into each other behind her gaze. Malcolm, she said softly, my name falling from her lips like a broken prayer. Or maybe a curse. Could have been either. Her hand instinctively rose to her neck, fingertips brushing the pulse point, as if she needed to confirm her heart was still there. Then he came into view. Reed, the man who'd been in my bed, in my home. He looked exactly like what I imagined, a gym rat in his mid-30s with the kind of body built for vanity, not strength. Shirtless, lean muscle on display, his messy hair mirroring Talia's. That cocky expression, the look of a man who thought he'd won something, lasted only a second. Because when he spotted the gun resting across my lap, the color drained from his face in waves. That confident smirk, gone. In its place was disbelief, then realization, and finally, sheer, soul-deep fear. His mouth opened, trying to speak, but nothing came out. Just silence. Panic. Talia took a careful step toward me, her voice so soft. It still sliced through the quiet like a scream. Malcolm, please. One arm lifted slightly, as if I were a wild animal she was trying to calm. Maybe I was. I didn't speak, didn't blink. I just sat there, still as stone, watching them both, their expressions, their trembling hands, the awkward way her robe slipped off her shoulder, the haunted guilt written across every inch of their bodies. Then Reed tried to talk. Look, man, that's all he got out before something inside me clicked. Not rage, not screaming fury. No. This was colder than that, sharper. A switch had flipped. The moment I saw his expensive shoes by the front door, I'd been descending into this still, icy space. He must have seen it in my face, because without another word, Reed turned and tried to flee upstairs, back to the place where this all began, like he could undo it by running. Like he could hide. That's when I pulled the trigger. The .45 thundered through the air like a hammer of the gods. The shot slammed into the banister a few inches from his head. Wood shattered, splinters flying in every direction. The scent of gunpowder swallowed the hallway, smoky, raw, sacred. Both of them screamed. Reed hit the stairs like a sack of bricks, while Talia slammed herself against the wall, frozen, barely breathing. The echo of the gunshot rang out forever, bouncing through the hall until it faded into an even deeper quiet. I could hear everything: my own steady pulse, Talia's frantic breaths, Reed's choked sobs. That, I said calmly, evenly, was your only warning. You can't really prepare yourself for the sound that comes after a gunshot. It's not just silence. It's a void, a punched and hollow space that wraps itself around everything. In that vacuum, with the metallic stink of spent gunpowder hanging between us, I looked at them, really looked, and saw something I hadn't before. They weren't my wife and some sleaze. They weren't people I recognized. They were strangers. Imposters. Actors who'd fooled me with their scripts and smiles. I'd shared a life with illusions. Reed lay sprawled against the stairs, trying to merge with the wood. Sweat poured from him, breath coming in shallow bursts. The man clearly hadn't worked out for moments like this. All those reps and protein shakes hadn't prepared him for real fear. Talia was stiff against the wall, gripping her robe shut with fists so tight her knuckles had gone pale. Her green eyes, once so warm, so full of the promises we'd made on our wedding day, were wide and terrified. But behind that fear, behind the shock, I saw something else. Strategy. She was already calculating. Already working the angles. How to twist this. How to make herself look like the victim. How to make me the villain. How to come out of this clean. That's when I realized just how blind I'd been. Don't move, I said, my voice slicing through the tension like glass. Don't speak unless I ask you something. And nobody leaves this house until I get the truth. They both nodded frantically, and I knew this wasn't over. It had only just begun. The bobblehead dolls in the back window bounced slightly, as if mocking the silence that had fallen in the room. Good. Let them be scared. Fear had a funny way of making people stop lying. And right now, the truth was all I cared about. I shifted. In the recliner, the old leather giving a tired groan under me, and kept the gun resting in their general direction, not directly pointed, but close enough to send the message. I wasn't some lunatic on the edge, but I was damn near close. How long? I asked flatly, locking eyes with Talia as she struggled to form words. Her lips parted, then closed again. She looked like someone about to step off a high dive with no water below, nervous, uncertain, scared. She opened her mouth again, and finally the words came. Malcolm, I can explain. Didn't ask for a story. I interrupted, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. I asked, how long? How long have you been sleeping with this bastard? In our bed? The silence afterward was thick enough to choke on. My question hovered in the air like smoke, curling into every corner of the room. Talia's face crumpled, and she winced like my words had slapped her. Funny, getting caught cheating didn't break her, but being confronted about it did. 6 months, she whispered, and those 2 syllables felt like they slammed in two. My chest with the force of a wrecking ball. Half a year. Jesus. That meant it started before my last birthday. Before that weekend trip to Napa. During all those nights she claimed she was with the girls, or buried in book club, or burning the midnight oil at work. Every business trip? I asked, already knowing the answer. She nodded, her cheeks wet now, not with guilt, with shame, embarrassment, fear of being exposed, not remorse over what she did. Where? I asked coldly. Mostly hotels, she replied. That's when Reed finally spoke. His voice cracked like a teenager's, shaky but trying for calm, as if we were discussing bad weather instead of the demolition of everything I'd built. Sometimes my place, when Dana was gone. I wasn't talking to you, I snapped, swinging the muzzle toward him just enough to make the point. In fact, the only time I want to hear you speak is if you're coughing up blood and need to make peace with God before you croak. His jaw clamped shut so fast it echoed. I turned my attention back to Talia. I stared at her face, really stared, like I was trying to recognize someone I hadn't seen before. And in a way, I was. The woman I thought I knew was gone. All that remained was a hollow mask wearing her skin. Did you use protection? Her expression shifted, puzzled, embarrassed, then something close to guilt. What? Not rocket science, Talia. When you were screwing this married lowlife, did you at least think to use protection? Or were you planning to leave me with a nice little going away infection? Her face drained of color, then flushed red, then went pale again like a flickering warning light. I was on the pill, she said weakly. I laughed, a bitter, dry laugh that scraped its way out of my chest. How thoughtful, I said, sarcasm thick in my voice. So you were planning to keep cheating, but not make it messy. Smart, modern, progressive. Malcolm? Please, please what? I cut her off again. Please forgive you? Please pretend like I didn't just watch the last 7 years of my life go up in flames? Please step aside so you and this walking STD can ride off into the sunset together? She broke down completely now. Full on ugly crying, black streaks of mascara running like war paint. And I didn't feel a thing. No pity, no sadness. Just a sickening realization that I once loved someone so spineless, so dishonest. I looked over at Reed again. He was pressed against the stair rail like he thought he could blend into the wood. How many? I asked him. He blinked confused. What? How many wives have you screwed? How many families have you torn apart? Don't tell me this is your first rodeo. He opened his mouth, closed it, like a fish gasping for air. Too many to count, huh? That checks out. You look the type. Sleazy charm, cheap cologne, lies for days. I turned back to Talia, who now looked more horrified than guilty, probably because she was realizing exactly who she'd sold her soul for. One last question, I said, calm as a lake on a windless day. Were you trying to get pregnant? She reeled like I'd slapped her. What? No, I told you I was on birth control. That's not what I asked, I said, my voice like ice. Were you hoping he'd knock you up, so you could walk away with half my assets and child support for some other man's kid? Malcolm. That's disgusting. You'd never? I tilted my head. You'd never cheat? You'd never lie? You'd never crawl into bed with a married man and screw him in a house I paid for, on sheets I washed, while telling me you were with your friends? She looked like she might faint, but I wasn't done. Not yet. You know what the saddest part is, I said, standing up slowly. I used to think you were the best thing that ever happened to me. Turns out, you were just the longest running mistake I ever made. And with that, I set the gun down on the table. Not because I was done being angry, but because I was done letting either of them see it. You spent half a year lying to my face? Brought your lover into our space, our bed? You already did it, sweetheart. So don't expect me to believe a damn thing about what you would never do. And just like that, her fight drained out of her. I could see it like someone flipped a switch and she just shut down. Her shoulders slumped. Her chin dropped to her chest. She slid down the wall like her legs had given out, settling on the floor in that overpriced silk robe like some shattered porcelain doll. I still love you, she breathed. Those words sparked more fury in me than if she'd screamed curses. And that's when I laughed. Not a bitter chuckle, not a scoff. No, this was full-throated, gut-wrenching laughter. It echoed off the walls and refused to die down. I laughed until my ribs ached and my eyes watered. Until both Talia and Reed looked at me like I'd finally snapped. Maybe I had. You love me? I asked between fits of laughter, finally managing to speak. That's hilarious. Truly, it's hilarious. You love me so much that you've been sleeping with that sorry excuse for a man for 6 months straight. You love me so much that you brought him into my house, into my bed on the very night I planned to surprise you with a trip to Santorini. For our anniversary, you love me so much, I said, stepping forward with the gun still in my grip, that you're ready to throw away everything we built, years of sacrifice, dreams, promises for a pathetic thrill ride with some walking disaster who leaves broken homes in his wake like breadcrumbs. I looked down at them, her crumpled on the floor, him frozen on the couch, and I felt nothing but disgust. They looked like human garbage that had somehow crawled into my life and made a home there. You don't know what love is, Talia, I said, voice low and cold. Because real love doesn't backstab. It doesn't lie. It doesn't turn a person's entire life into a cruel punchline. The woman I had once built my entire future around said nothing. She looked up at me, with tears cutting through her makeup, and I knew we both knew there was nothing left to be said. The truth was out, thick in the air like smoke after a house fire, all-consuming, unforgiving. There comes a point in a man's life when he realizes that talking won't fix a damn thing, that no amount of calm discussions or polite reasoning can undo the kind of damage people inflict with their choices. That moment hit me like a freight train about 30 seconds ago. I reached for Reed's phone on the coffee table. It was lighting up again and again, Dana's name flashing on the screen like a signal flare. The man's wife or soon-to-be ex, depending on how fast she moved. The phone felt oddly heavy, like it carried every lie, every whispered betrayal, every broken vow these two had shared. Here, I said, holding it out. Reed stared at it like it might explode. Honestly, it might as well have. Take it, I snapped. His hand trembled as he reached for it, and when our fingers brushed, I almost recoiled. Just imagining those same hands all over my wife made me want to vomit. Call her, I ordered, voice calm as stone. Tell Dana where you are, what you've been doing. Tell her exactly who she married. He looked ready to faint. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He opened his mouth. Look man, I know I cut him off. I don't care what you think. I'm not asking. This isn't a negotiation. You're going to call her, and you're going to tell her everything. She already knows, he muttered. You already told her. Yeah, she knows the broad strokes, but she doesn't know the fine print. Does she? She doesn't know it's been going on half a year. She doesn't know this is a pattern. For you, that you've done this before, that you've wrecked families like it's a hobby, that you toss your phone and your wallet around another man's house like you live here. I saw the panic spike in his eyes. His gaze darted to the door. He was calculating, wondering if he could make it out before I stopped him. Don't, I said flatly, like I was commenting on the weather. Just don't. He froze. I was second best shot in my class before I dropped out of the academy. For law school, I added, like it was just a fun fact. 3 bullets in your chest before you take your second step. That's not a threat. That's a fact. Whatever escape plan had been forming in his pea-sized brain dissolved right then. His whole body deflated. He stared down at the phone like it was coated in acid, and all I did was wait. He was shaking, barely holding it together. Please, he whispered. My kids. I leaned in slightly, letting the silence stretch. Your kids? I echoed. Let's talk about them then. How old are they? His throat bobbed as he swallowed. 8 and 10, 8 and 10, I repeated, letting the weight of those numbers linger. So they're old enough to notice when their dad doesn't come home anymore. Old enough to hear the neighbors gossiping about what you did. Old enough to feel ashamed every time someone mentions your name. You realize this isn't just some scandal you can bury, right? It's going on record. Permanently. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. I could see the impact of my words crawling across his face, slow, creeping dread settling into his bones. This wasn't about lust or sneaking around for a thrill. This had repercussions. Serious ones. Messy ones. Ones that would echo through both our homes for years. You should have thought about your children, I said, my voice low but razor sharp, before you crawled into my wife's bed like a parasite. Reed sat there, frozen, shaking, pitiful. But you didn't? I added. So here we are. Make the call. His fingers trembled as he fumbled with the phone. It took him 3 attempts to open his contact list. Sweat clung to his brow, dripping down in spite of the cool temperature inside. His hands looked like they didn't belong to him anymore. I can't, he whispered. I can't do it. And that's when something inside me gave way, not with rage, but with a clarity so cold and final it felt like stepping through ice. I moved without hesitation. I lifted the .45 and fired a shot straight into his left thigh. The sound cracked through the room like a thunderclap, louder than the last time. The blast reverberated off the walls, a brutal echo. My ears rang, and the room smelled sharp with burnt gunpowder. Reed screamed, high-pitched and raw, a sound that didn't belong to a grown man. It was the cry of someone who'd never tasted real agony before. He dropped hard, hands clutching at the wound, blood spreading fast across his pants and soaking into the floorboards. The phone skidded away, coming to rest near Talia's bare feet. She started screaming too. Piercing, shrill, like a siren. Malcolm, oh my God, you shot him. You actually shot him. I did, I answered, completely calm, watching Reed writhe on the ground. Blood was pooling across the floor Talia had chosen herself after weeks of comparing wood samples, and I'll do it again if he doesn't do what he's told. Reed's sounds had devolved into guttural gasps, his voice caught between crying and pleading. But I wasn't done, not even close. He's not going to die, I said evenly, as if I were explaining a cooking recipe. I made sure to avoid anything vital. The bullet passed clean through. No arteries, no bones, just pain. A whole lot of pain. I stepped toward the phone and picked it up from the floor, then dropped it on his chest. It bounced and landed beside him. Try again, I said. Tell your wife what you've done. He whimpered, fingers slick with blood, barely able to unlock the screen. It hurts, he mumbled. Of course it does, I said plainly. That's what pain is for. It sharpens the mind, helps you focus, helps you see exactly where you went wrong. He pressed the phone to his ear as best he could, trembling. Talia had stopped screaming. Now she was making these tiny, helpless noises, whimpers like an abandoned animal. She stared down at the growing blood stain on the floor, mouth slightly open in disbelief, as if this wasn't her reality. "Malcolm," she finally whispered, voice cracking. "This is too far. You need to stop. We need to get him help." "Oh, I'm calling for help," I said, already pulling out my own phone. But not just yet. I opened the keypad and hovered over the emergency number. "First," I said, "Reed is going to come clean to his wife. He's going to tell her what he's done. Then he's going to tell me how many other families he's wrecked playing this little game of his. Then and only then will I call the ambulance." I brought up 911 on my screen but didn't hit the call button. Just held it in my hand like a loaded weapon. "Here's how this plays out," I said in a calm, steady voice that didn't need to rise to be terrifying. "I call the cops. I tell them I found my wife in bed with a man who attacked me. I defended myself. One shot. Intruder neutralized." Reed tried to object, to speak, but only a hoarse wheeze escaped his mouth. "I'll tell them he broke in." I continued. "That he got violent when I confronted him. That I feared for my life and did what I had to. It'll be my word against his. And we both know whose reputation holds more weight in this neighborhood." I looked down at him, lying in a growing puddle of his own blood. My smile wasn't kind, it was cold and hollow and carved out of pure certainty. "Now, if Reed wants to give them another version of the story, he's welcome to try," I added. "But that means admitting to the affair, to trespassing, to threatening me in my own home. He'd be looking at charges that don't just ruin his career, they take him away from his precious kids. Forever." And with that, I pressed the call button. 911. "What's your emergency?" "This is Malcolm Briggs," I said, staring at Reed without blinking. "I'm at 1247 North Astor Street. There's been a shooting." My voice remained perfectly calm, each word clipped and professional. "I need to report a shooting," I told the dispatcher. "There was a break-in. A man entered my home and threatened my family. I had no choice but to defend them." The operator's tone didn't change. "Are you safe now, sir?" "Yes. The danger has been handled. The intruder's injured, but still alive. I'll need both an ambulance and police response. Help is en route. Stay on the line." I lowered my eyes to where Reed lay sprawled on the floor, blood soaking into my living room carpet. His gaze met mine, fear swimming in it, pain too, and maybe something else. Was it respect, gratitude, or just the dizziness of blood loss clouding his judgment? "You know what's funny?" I said aloud, mostly to myself as much as to them. "I had a surprise planned. Tickets to Santorini, hotel reservations, even got you that necklace you pointed out last month." I shook my head slowly, like I couldn't believe the cosmic joke life had handed me. "I was going to ask you to renew our vows on the same beach we got married on." The irony stung. Instead of a romantic gesture, I stood here watching my marriage end in a puddle of someone else's blood. My wife's lover bleeding into the floorboards of our home. Sirens began wailing in the distance, sharp, mechanical screams tearing through the evening like wolves on a scent. It wouldn't be long before our quiet little house was crawling with medics, officers, and investigators, each one trying to put the pieces together. But I already had the full picture. Justice had paid us a visit. Even if most men these days forgot what it meant to protect what was theirs, I hadn't, of course. Justice doesn't always come without a cost. County lockup was a far cry from the polished floors of my law office. Not that I was unfamiliar with the place, I'd spent more time in those bleak gray hallways than some guards had, but always as a visitor, a professional. Now I was an inmate, less than 24 hours ago. I was Malcolm Briggs, attorney at law, with a corner office in downtown Chicago and a window view of Lake Michigan. Now, I was wearing an orange jumpsuit that smelled like bleach and desperation, sitting on a bench surrounded by concrete and buzzing fluorescent lights. I'd been fingerprinted, questioned, and processed like any other suspect. And all for doing what needed to be done: self-defense. That was the key. They recorded my statement, which mirrored my 911 call down to the word. A man broke into my home. He posed a threat. I protected my family. Simple, clean, legal. Detective Morrison, thick-necked and tired-looking, was the one who tried to poke holes in it. He'd seen too many stories fall apart under pressure, and he was convinced mine would too. He tried everything: sympathy, intimidation, the old between professionals approach. But I stuck to my version like gospel. I wasn't about to let Him twist what happened. That the intruder just so happened to be sleeping with my wife? Irrelevant. Coincidence. An emotional charge? Sure. But not the motive. I kept my cool, because I knew something Morrison did in single quotes T. In a few hours. Jerome would show up with the paperwork, the cash, the signature. My partner would post bail, and I'd be back on the outside. In jail. People gave me space. I didn't speak to anyone, and they didn't try me. Word spreads fast inside those walls, especially when you've got the look of someone who meant every ounce of what he did. That suited me just fine. I needed room to think, because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Reed had messed with the wrong man, and I was going to return the favor with interest. Only this time, it'd be by the book. No violence, no blood, just legal destruction. So precise, it'd leave nothing behind but ashes. I was working through the pieces of that plan when the guard arrived. Briggs, you're good. Bail's been posted. Jerome met me in the lobby. He looked worn down, older somehow, like the night had wrung every bit of energy from him. His suit was wrinkled, hair out of place, and his eyes hollow from lack of sleep. You all right? He asked as we walked toward his car. Not yet, I said honestly, but I will be. He didn't press for details. He didn't need to. We'd been partners too long for that. Instead, he filled me in on everything I missed. The press was already outside my house. The first court date had been set. Reed would survive. Talia moved out. Jerome added as we pulled into the driveway. Took only her things. Left the rest untouched. I nodded slowly. That was smart of her. The prenup we signed, ironclad. She wasn't walking away with a dime more than she brought in. 7 years together, and it all ended like this. Jerome glanced at his phone. Reed was released from the hospital an hour ago. His wife Dana met him in the parking lot with divorce papers and a restraining order. For the first time in days, I felt my lips curve into a real smile. Dana had kept her word, and Reed, he was about to learn that betrayal doesn't just end marriages. Sometimes it ruins lives, and this time, the damage was just getting started. She deserves more than a lying dog who can't stay faithful, I muttered. Jerome glanced over at me, eyes narrowing. What are you thinking, Malcolm? I turned toward the house. Ours. Well, what used to be ours. Now, it was just mine. In name and in pain. Something cold settled deep in my chest, sharp and deliberate. Reed thought this was behind him. That taking a bullet in the leg was some kind of final reckoning. That he could limp off into the sunset, bandage his pride, and chase down his next victim. He was mistaken. I'm thinking about practicing law, I said calmly. I'm thinking about putting everything I've learned in nearly 2 decades of defense work to good use, making sure Reed truly understands what his actions cost. Jerome pulled the car into the driveway and turned to face me. Malcolm, I get that you're hurting. I know you're angry, I'm not. I cut in, and for the first time, I realized it was true. The fury had burned itself out. What was left wasn't anger, it was focus. Cold, steady, dangerous focus. We sat there in silence, both of us staring at the building where my life had come apart, where love turned to betrayal, and routine turned to war. He thinks it's finished, I said after a long pause. Reed believes a bullet balanced the scales, but he overlooked one critical detail. What's that? I stepped out of the car, the wind off Lake Michigan brushing my skin, waking me up from the daze I'd been in for months. I felt alive. I'm a lawyer, I said, and we don't just play defense, we tear people apart in the courtroom. We don't lose battles, we end them. And revenge? Revenge smells best when mixed with the aroma of scalding hot coffee. A tea exactly am the next day. Jerome showed up at my doorstep with a bag full of breakfast sandwiches and 2 oversized lattes that probably required a small loan to purchase. But it wasn't the food that got my blood moving. It was the thick manila folder tucked beneath his arm, nearly bursting at the seams. You look like hell, he said as soon as I opened the door. He wasn't wrong. I'd spent the entire night lying in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, my brain moving like a seasoned tactician, plotting possibilities, anticipating counterattacks. I feel great, I said, and for the first time in a long time, I meant it. This wasn't work. This wasn't about billable hours or court appearances. This was justice. Raw, personal, beautiful. We took seats at the kitchen table, once the place where Talia and I shared sleepy mornings, coffee cups clinking between smiles. Now, it felt like a war room. Jerome opened the folder and spread its contents across the table like playing cards at a high-stakes poker game. You were right about Reed, he said, satisfaction creeping into his voice. The guy's been dirty for years. The first document he handed over was from Reed's employment records at Cormark Industries. How he got it, I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Jerome had friends in low places, and legal favors were currency in Chicago. Reed Marshall, vice president of business development, 42 years old, married for over a decade, 2 children, lived in a house in Wilmette worth more than most people would make in 10 lifetimes. On paper, he looked like a clean-cut suburban success story. PTA meetings, little league coach, summer barbecues, but scratch the surface and the truth came. Bleeding out, 3 women, Jerome said, tapping 3 separate reports buried deep in corporate records like dirty secrets. 3 harassment claims, quietly settled, no consequences. I grabbed the first one, dated 3 years back. Sarah Chun, 26, a marketing staffer, accused Reed of repeated inappropriate conduct, lewd comments, unwanted physical contact during company trips, and a toxic work environment. The investigation, handled by an internal team which might as well have been Reed's personal cleanup crew. In the end, a silent settlement and a gag order wrapped in legal language. Next one. Jennifer Walsh, 29, sales, same accusations, same pattern. Another cover-up stamped and filed, but it was the third that made me grip the paper a little tighter. Lisa Rodriguez, executive assistant, 31, filed just 8 months ago. Her complaint was detailed, brutal, and backed up by digital receipts, emails, texts, call logs, predator, manipulator, power abuser, all there in black and white. Piece of shit, I hissed as I read through Lisa's statement. Reed had used his title like a weapon, cornering her in closed-door meetings, dangling promotions, threatening consequences when she refused. And the company? They didn't fire him. They buried it. But I wasn't going to .no. I had something better in mind. Something permanent. Cormark's gleaming reputation masked a rot that had been festering for years. Reed, the so-called golden boy of the company, had leveraged his position to exploit others, offering promotions in exchange for favors and threatening careers if he didn't get his way. It was a textbook case of workplace sexual misconduct, the kind that demanded immediate termination and possibly even legal action. But instead of firing him, Cormark had written a check, a generous one reportedly well into 6 figures, to silence Lisa, one of his many victims, and reassigned her to a department where she wouldn't have to see him again. To them, that was closure, problem resolved. The company moved on, but the damage lingered in silence. Jerome wasn't done. With a wry smile, he slid a fresh stack of papers across the table. You'll love this, he said. Guess who gave us all this information? I glanced up from Lisa's complaint, curious. Gaining access to these kinds of confidential HR files, settlement agreements, sealed complaints wasn't just difficult. It was damn near impossible without serious internal help. Dana, Jerome said, the grin on his face feral. Reed's soon-to-be ex-wife, works in our, has been for the past 6 years. The revelation hit me like a punch to the chest, but in the best way. Dana hadn't been in the dark. She'd been collecting receipts. For years, she'd played the dutiful spouse, silently cataloging her husband's misdeeds, slowly building a case, patient, deliberate, and devastating. She came by the office yesterday, Jerome added. Walked in with 2 full boxes of documentation and a story that'd make your skin crawl. She's known about his affairs for years, stayed silent for the kids. But after your call, that was the last straw. I could picture her clearly, sitting across from Jerome, her life in pieces, her patience at its end, no longer willing to shield the man who had trampled over both their marriage and the careers of the women he targeted. What's she after? I asked, though the answer already hovered on the edge of my mind. She wants everything. Full custody, proper alimony, based on his real earnings. And she wants him held accountable for everything he's done to those women at Cormark. Jerome produced another document, this one printed on Cormark Industries letterhead. She also brought us this. Reed's contract. I scanned it. There it was, clear as day, a morality clause. Like most high-level executives, Reed's agreement allowed immediate dismissal for any behavior that tarnished the company's image. Affairs, sexual harassment, misuse of resources, any of it was grounds for termination. And termination meant no severance, no golden parachute. They haven't connected the dots yet, Jerome said. They don't know he was using company time and assets to carry out his affair with your wife. Don't know he had unprotected sex with a married woman on corporate property. If an STD or pregnancy had occurred, the liability alone would have been catastrophic. My mind raced. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was about justice, real, fighting, permanent. Not the kind that ends with a bruise or a limp, but the kind that rewrites the rest of someone's life. She wants to testify, Jerome added. She'll go on record about the affairs, his workplace violations, even the hush payments he arranged for the others. She's done covering for him. I leaned back in my chair, taking in the mountain of evidence sprawled across my table. Emails, internal memos, financial documents, legal filings. It was the kind of paper trail that didn't just destroy reputations, it vaporized them. And there's more, Jerome said, reaching into his briefcase. I made some calls yesterday. Turns out Reed's been skating on thin ice for a while. He's been stealing credit, inflating expenses, typical arrogant exec behavior. The higher-ups have been itching to cut him loose. They just needed a push. He handed me a printout of an internal email thread between Cormark's CEO and the legal department. Subject: Reed Marshall liability risk. They'd already begun preparing, building their case, waiting for something solid enough to fire him without a wrongful termination suit. Now, we had everything. I stared at the pile of documentation. This wasn't just revenge, it was a dismantling, a complete and utter collapse. Career, reputation, finances, family, all of it. Gone. Jerome looked at me, eyes lit with anticipation. So, what's our play? I picked up my mug, letting the warmth of the coffee seep into my palms as I drank deeply. This moment, this exact moment I had been working toward from the second I realized what Reed had done. He'd swaggered into my life thinking he could steal my wife, wreck my home, and limp away like some tragic anti-hero. He had no idea who he was dealing with. We go in guns blazing, I said. And we don't stop until there's nothing left of his empire but ashes and regret. Jerome's grin stretched across his face. Thought you might say that. The morning air was crisp. The sun barely filtered through the towering skyline as we approached Cormark's headquarters, a shrine of steel and glass spanning 30 floors in downtown Chicago. Every inch of the building screamed power, wealth, control. But today, we were bringing the reckoning. Modern art pieces lined the lobby, the kind that looked like they belonged in a museum or on the auction block for the price of a suburban home. The front desk could have passed for something out of a sci-fi film, all sleek angles and chrome. Jerome and I strode through the glass entrance like we were shareholders rather than uninvited guests. In a way, we were about to claim ownership, if not of the company, then of its fate. I held a fine leather briefcase packed with enough evidence to obliterate Reed's professional standing and cast a long shadow over Cormark's carefully polished image. Jerome carried a nearly identical case, brimming with legal ammunition potent enough to make the company's attorneys consider early retirement. We were dressed sharply tailored suits, confident stride, the kind of look that said, "This isn't a social call. This is an execution." The elevator ride to the top floor gave me a moment to enjoy the panoramic view. From here, Chicago unfurled beneath us like a living map, full of ambition and opportunity. Somewhere out in that sprawl, Reed was likely resting his injured leg, convinced that the worst had passed. The fool. What waited now wasn't recovery, it was reckoning. Patrick Sloane's corner office was everything a self-made tycoon would. Design, leather, glass, marble, plaques and framed accolades filled the walls, and the city skyline served as his backdrop. The man himself, early 52nds, silver at the temples, eyes sharp and calculating, stood as a testament to ambition and survival. He rose to greet us when his assistant showed us in, offering smiles, coffee, and the kind of pleasantries meant to test the waters before battle. But I saw the tension behind his practiced charm. CEOs don't enjoy surprise visits from attorneys, with grim expressions and hard cases. And Sloane knew it. "Gentlemen," he said, lowering himself into his executive chair like he was bracing for a storm. "What can I do for you?" I didn't bother with the dance. "Your vice president is a predator," I said plainly, "and your company has been shielding him." The blood drained from Sloane's face so fast, I wondered if he might pass out. He tried to hold his composure, but I'd spent over a decade dissecting reactions in courtrooms. I knew shame when I saw it. "I think there's some misunderstanding about Mr. Marshall," Jerome cut in smoothly, cracking open his briefcase. With a flourish honed by years in litigation, 3 harassment cases, All within the past 5 years, he said, lifting files one by one. All silenced with company funds. All swept under the rug. We had rehearsed every beat of this confrontation. As Jerome laid out the legal points, I opened my case and began placing documents across Sloane's desk like puzzle pieces in a damning portrait. Sarah Chun, Jennifer Walsh, Lisa Rodriguez, I said, lining up the women's complaints in a row. These are the ones who spoke up. Who knows how many stayed silent because your company made them believe it wouldn't matter. Sloane looked at the files as if they might burst into flames. These issues were handled internally, they were buried, I corrected, to protect a man who's a walking lawsuit. And now, thanks to that little morality clause in your company's handbook, you're wide open to multiple hostile workplace claims. If this goes public, the damages won't just be financial. Your brand's integrity is on the line. Sloane didn't argue. He didn't have to. I could see him calculating costs, weighing fallout, settlements, investigations, media storms. He was already deciding how to sever the limb to save the body. What are you looking for? He asked finally. Just like that, the walls came down. He wasn't going to defend Reed. He was already cutting his losses. But I didn't come here for a simple fix. He dismantled my marriage, I said, leaning in, my voice low and tight. He invaded my home, my wife, my family, and he thought he'd limp away from it all with a scar and a transfer. I pulled out the final document, setting it down with a quiet, lethal weight. It was a lawsuit, bulletproof and brutal and all out. Assault on both Reed and the institution that let him operate unchecked, negligence, enabling abuse, complicity, obstruction, you name it. We documented it. We could file this by noon and watch your shareholders revolt while journalists crawl through your HR records. Sloane tried to float alternatives, smaller payments, backroom deals, anything to keep the lid on, but I wasn't bargaining. I was setting terms, 7 figures, I said. Public statements acknowledging what Reed did, apologies to every victim, full cooperation with law enforcement. And Reed, gone, effective immediately, no severance, no benefits. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Sloane stared across the table, not at the papers, not at Jerome, at me, like he was finally seeing who he was up against. Not just a lawyer with a vendetta, a man who'd already lost everything and now had nothing left to lose. I wasn't some betrayed husband looking to lick his wounds. I was a man on a mission, a calculated force poised to dismantle the life of the man who thought he could play God without consequences. I stood up, adjusting my tie with precision, letting the silence hang between us like a loaded gun. Reed believed that seducing another man's wife was some harmless indulgence. Today, he'd learn what it truly cost. Sloane instinctively reached for his phone, probably trying to rally the legal troops, but it was pointless. The fight had ended before it even began. Jerome and I walked out through the cold, echoing lobby, the marble under our feet gleaming like a battlefield trophy. I didn't feel triumphant, yet not exactly. What I felt was the thrill of imminent justice, of a reckoning long overdue. Reed had walked into my home like a thief in the night and taken what didn't belong to him. I planned to end this in ways he never anticipated. 3 years have passed since my world was turned upside down, and now I sit here, staring out at the Aegean from the same terrace where Talia and I once planned to celebrate our anniversary. The irony is intoxicating, sweeter even than the rich wine I sip. This cliffside villa costing more per week than most people make in a month is more than a retreat. It's a symbol of survival and of triumph. Cormark's 7-figure settlement was just the spark that lit the fuse. Dana, once the collateral damage of Reed's recklessness, now runs our family law division. She passed the bar after juggling classes and solo parenting, never once letting the weight slow her down. I've watched her transformation with admiration. She left Marshall the moment the ink dried on the divorce papers. We work closely, maybe it'll turn into more someday, but there's no hurry. Peace feels better when it isn't rushed. Reed, last I heard, he was hustling used cars somewhere on the outskirts of St. Louis. All the things he once held up as proof of success, his home, his standing, even his time with his children gone. He sees them twice a month if he can afford the trip. His empire of deceit collapsed under the weight of legal claims, ruined reputations, and personal betrayals. And the best part? Every move I made was by the book. No threats, no shortcuts, just consequences, served slowly and thoroughly. Talia took off for California after the divorce. Thanks to the ironclad prenup, she left with only what she brought into the marriage. I don't think about her much anymore. The fire, both the love and the rage, burned itself out. What remains is a quiet void. Not regret, not sorrow, just absence. Our firm is thriving now. Taking down corrupt executives makes for powerful marketing. Jerome and I hired new associates, and we're eyeing expansion. Funny how vengeance and purpose can walk hand in hand. Sometimes destroying someone isn't the goal. Sometimes the real victory is becoming someone they never imagined you'd be. I was watching the sun melt into the horizon from my terrace when the call came. Jerome's voice cut through the stillness like a blade. She stopped by, he said. No preamble, no drama. She didn't look good, Mal. Really didn't. She's sick, terminal. They say she's got half a year, maybe. I took another sip of wine. The sky glowing molten gold above the sea. What did she want? She wanted to see you. Said she wanted to make things right. Asked me to give her your number. I didn't even have to think. The answer was already there. Tell her no. A pause. A long one. Jerome knew me well enough to hear the finality in my tone, but he still gave it one more shot. She sounded sincere. You're sure? I'm sure, I said, placing my glass down and leaning back, utterly calm. She made her decisions. So did I. I have no interest in deathbed apologies. Jerome respected that. We'd been through hell together, and he understood that I wasn't the same man I used to be. The one who might have welcomed the drama, sought the tears, wanted closure. But that man no longer existed. That night, as the stars shimmered over the island, I thought about what closure really meant. People think it requires grand endings, explosive fights, dramatic apologies, last-minute forgiveness. But I've learned it's often much simpler than that. Sometimes it's a quiet understanding that someone you once built your world around is just irrelevant now. I didn't feel vindicated by her illness. I didn't feel sad either. There was no satisfaction in her suffering, no ache for what had been, just a clear, still void where once there had been chaos. She was nothing more than a spark that lit the fire which forged the life I have now. The man I used to be, raging, broken, gun in hand, might have picked up the phone, might have sought resolution. But that man was long gone. In his place stood someone unshakable, someone who had built himself from the ground up, brick by deliberate brick, and who no longer gave his peace away so easily. I raised my glass again, not in sorrow or triumph, but in quiet celebration, not of her ending, but of my beginning. Because sometimes, revenge isn't about destruction. It's about rising. So completely, so thoroughly, that the people who once shattered you don't even matter anymore. And the sweetest kind of justice is simply not caring at all.